We are emerging into a new post-COVID reality, and it is requiring a new set of skill sets, a new set of leadership, or maybe it's just requiring existing skill sets that we need to refresh and sharpen the tools on. Hey, make sure if you're an owner or key leader, go to mybusinessonpurpose.com/healthy 7-minute healthy business assessment. It'll help you to stack your business up against some others and understand what a score is so you can understand the health of your business. I want you to think about all the words and phrases that are used every day today, at the time of this recording, 2021, that were really not much in our glossary of public terms, even just in 2019. Herd immunity, social distancing, PPE, R-not, self-quarantine, mask up, flattening the curve, remote learning. Later today, I'll hop on a plane and fly across the ocean, and I'll have to wear a mask the entire time. Something totally new, especially in a Western context. I recently received a booster shot at a local drugstore pharmacy counter on a quiet weekday evening. And while standing there waiting for my shot, I saw 4 different people approach the counter asking about the same thing: COVID testing kits. Most schools were, and in some cases still are, remote only. Many businesses were sending their teams into remote locations. If you had the sniffles or a small headache or anyone else you knew about would immediately assume the onset of COVID symptoms, virus positive by symptomatic association only. This led to business owners and key leaders who were quick to send team members home altogether where the expectation of productivity would generally be reduced. Not in all cases, but in some certainly. The circular repetition of fear of infection or home-based quarantine became frequent as variant waves of the disease has hit. And many suffered biologically with the pandemic, but many more suffered emotionally and mentally. The uncertainty played with our minds. The confusion played with otherwise stable systems of daily living. Basic stuff, going out to eat, going to a local place, and instead of showing up at 6 o'clock for dinner, you show up at 6 o'clock and the door's locked. Not enough staff. Just-in-time manufacturing supply chains were disrupted and stalled. The workplace has been called home for dinner, not realizing that much of the light that guided businesses prior to 2020 has been dimmed, lacking the bright lights of grit, self-awareness, and determination. They've been compromised with the darkness of uncertainty, confusion, and a mindset that bows to each of our own upper limit challenge. So we talk about this tool of grit, this emotional capacity of grit, and why it's necessary. In order to rekindle the daylight of clarity, the roadmaps of vision, and the motivational sounds of collaboration, support, belief, and courage, we need to become aware of the impending darkness and choose to replace it with the light of grit. A recent business owner was hosting her regular check-in with one of her key leaders, and the key leader made mention of feeling burned out after realizing that the team member had only been a part of the mission for less than 24 months. The owner had an honest narrative in her head, and it said something like this: "You don't even know what burnout looks like yet." But she chose not to say anything. Instead, the owner made a decision to call the key leader to a higher level of leadership and to encourage the leader to realize that she was not even close to the ceiling of her capability, telling her, "There are so many others waiting to be served and impacted through your work. We're not going to allow the public narrative of burnout to become the dominant narrative in her head." Instead, the owner chose to replace the narrative of burnout with one of potential, opportunity, risk, adventure, and work. She chose to help her key leader bust the ceiling of the upper limit challenge. Grit, I looked it up, is defined as courage and resolve and strength of character. Courage, resolve, and strength of character. Courage is tied directly to fear. Courage cannot be displayed where fear is not present. In order to achieve courage, you must go through fear. Resolve is an unyielding commitment to a specific direction. Character is the person you are when no one else is looking. And grit is courage, resolve, and character all combined together. Without grit, race cars never go fast, athletes never break records, businesses never drive to new horizons. Without grit, parents don't produce kids that turn out to be awesome adults, marriages dissolve, Mars doesn't get explored, and without grit, the printing press is never created. In his enlightening podcast, How I Built This, Guy Raz brings powerful stories to some of the most successful and sizable companies around the world. I remember Dave Dahl, the story of Dave's Killer Bread. And Guy Raz tells the story as he interviews Dave of how Dave went from a prison convict to building a powerful bread brand. And through it all, how he still continued to suffer in his mind. Or across the street in Milwaukee, Oregon, you have David's famous bread on one side, and you have Bob's Red Mill on the other. And Bob explains how his life's work went up into flames one night and how he led a lifelong comeback. Guy Raz certainly talks about the success of each company and yet does a remarkable job of taking you into the underground of each one of those successes. You start to realize that it is not so much about the money that's interesting, but how each person has had to show a constant display of grit, courage, resolve, character, and cultivate a culture of grit within their team. See, I'm starting to believe we've been sold a lie, and that lie is work a little bit, play a lot, retire early, and ride off into the sunset. I think it's a lie. I'm giving you a warning right now. The work till you drop now so you can play golf till you drop later strategy, it doesn't satisfy. Not to mention there's no guarantee that later even comes. It's one of the more unfortunate lessons from the pandemic. If you live in a retirement community like I do, you'll see what I mean. We're surrounded by retirees. We've got to learn how to work well, play well, love well, and live well all at the same time. And that requires courage, resolve, and character. That's grit. So, how do we cultivate grit? Well, let's take grit and break it down in its 4 component parts, G-R-I-T. The G stands for grind at the right time. Grind at the right time. What do I mean? Well, grinding is simply the basics of critical thinking, drilling down deeper and deeper. Grinding is the basics of active listening. When you're listening to somebody, writing down what they're saying, repeating what they're saying, responding to what they're saying. That's grinding. Grinding is giving 10% more than what you think is enough. Grinding is looking forward to feedback, asking for feedback, seeking feedback, wanting feedback through things like check-ins. But remember, we want to grind at the right time. And so at the right time is having and holding to a weekly schedule. At the right time is being all there in that meeting, at that site visit, at that lunch meeting. At the right time is not cutting corner, but using the corners as time to bust through your upper limit challenges. We've got to, in order to develop grit, grind at the right time. The R stands for role clarity, aka do your job. If you're doing the wrong thing at the right time, that's frustrating. As long as we know that our work is not in vain, it allows us to maintain the fuel needed to know we are doing the right work. If you do not currently have a written role, even if you're the owner, write it down. We've got to have role clarity. So we've got to grind at the right time. We've got to have role clarity. And the I stands for identify fear and leave the harbor. Aristotle said in 300 BC, fear is pain arising from the anticipation of evil, even when the evil never comes. Around 64 AD, 400 years later, Paul, a Middle Eastern vagabond, author, and teacher, said plainly to one of his students, God simply has not pre-installed you with fear or a timid soul. Instead, your life booms with power, love, and a sound mind. Nelson Mandela, just in this last century, said the brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Fear has been a theme of every generation in different expressions. So how do we conquer fear? We equip, we plan, we use proper navigation, and then we steer out of the safety of the harbor into the open ocean. So we've got to grind at the right time. We've got to have role clarity. We've got to identify fear and leave the harbor. And the T, we've got to trail a mentor and a coach. Right now, as a professional coach, I myself have a business coaching group I meet with weekly. It's not a client of mine. I am a client of theirs. I've got a psychologist I meet with monthly. I've got a speaker coach I meet with every other week. I've got 2 wisdom mentors I meet with 4 times a year, and I've got 2 guys locally that we meet together for breakfast about 20 to 30 times a year. And I'm a professional coach. Everyone needs a coach because everyone is broken. Just admit it. We need to find somebody older, wiser, with a different perspective who will push us. Bill Gates famously said, everyone needs a coach. Eric Schmidt, on an interview, the former chair of Google, said the exact same thing. He said, everyone needs a coach. Think about this. At the height of their game, Ronaldo still has coaches. Simone Biles has coaches. Serena Williams has coaches. Tom Brady, the best quarterback of all time, has coaches. LeBron James still has coaches. Russell Wilson, the NFL quarterback, is reported to have spent upwards of $1 million on specialists and coaches just to make sure he's prepared physically and mentally. Grit only comes through hardships, uphill climbs, and bad weather. It's conditioning. Muscles grow through trauma. Grit does not come merely with the passage of time, but comes instead with a cocktail of time marked by maturity. Grit as a training topic used to not make the top of the list of necessary instruction, but for a variety of reasons, that has changed. We need grit to lead. We need grit to serve. We need grit to show up. We need grit to be generous. And when we grind at the right time, when we have role clarity, when we identify fear and leave the harbor, and we trail a mentor or a coach, then we're being liberated from chaos to make time for what matters most. Again, make sure to go check out our Healthy Owner Assessment. Go to mybusinessonpurpose.com/healthy. It'll take you 7 minutes, and it will bring you clarity as to the health of your business.